So how are they gonna pay for this infrastructure bill? And honestly, look, the bipartisan version, the reconciliation version, both of them are gonna be expensive. They're gonna have to be paid for in some way, but we've known for some time that the Republicans are not going to approve of certain forms of payment. Namely, returning taxes to where they were at before Donald Trump, having any new taxes whatsoever. Those are two pretty big ones. So one thing that had been proposed was, hey, so we have these laws where you're supposed to pay taxes. We're not talking about new taxes, we're talking about the taxes that already exist. You're supposed to pay them, and like it turns out that you're not. The rich in our country are not. So why don't we fund the IRS and we can figure out which people are breaking the law? And that seemed like it might work, but now it's looking less likely. Senator Rob Portman said on Sunday that IRS enforcement was officially off the table as a means of paying for any part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He cited pushback from fellow Republican lawmakers who dislike the idea of expanding the reach of the IRS, which they have accused over the years of unfairly targeting conservatives. He said another reason the IRS provision was shelved is the Democrats are including a more robust enforcement plan in a separate $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that they intended to pass through the Senate using special budget rules and without Republican votes. The deal would have provided a $40 billion budget boost for the IRS after decades of cuts, funding that would presumably allow the IRS Enforcement Division to collect unpaid taxes. Recent IRS research says the annual tax gap between just 2011 to 2013 was $441 billion. A Treasury Department analysis used that figure to project a $584 billion gap for 2019. So look, he says two things. One, we don't want to do it. And two, you guys are gonna do it anyway in the bipartisan version. So David, my question for you is, if it's gonna happen anyway, why not sign on to it? It seems like your opposition, based on what you're saying, is purely symbolic, but you want to symbolically make sure that people know you're against the IRS being able to do their job?
It's illogical. I mean, if you want to somehow put some constraints on how the IRS does its job, then you would think, okay, let's just say, yes, there can be more money for the IRS for enforcement. And we're gonna, as Republicans, we're gonna shape the language in this bill so that there's certain things that maybe the IRS can't do or can't go after. But by just saying, oh no, we're not gonna be part of this at all, then it does leave all of this to the Democrats to say, okay, we're gonna write whatever sort of language we want in this separate bill. But here's the thing that sort of jumps out to me. Never mind whether the Democrats are really gonna put this in this bill that they passed through reconciliation or whatever. Here are Republicans admitting, I think what so many of us have known for all along, and that is, yes, the people who are not paying their taxes are largely the rich, are largely the conservatives, the people who can afford to hire these fancy accountants and create these offshore accounts and all these sort of loopholes. Those are the ones who, yes, should be paying more. And now you have Republicans admitting it. Yes, those are our constituents. We don't want to hurt them. We don't want to make them mad. So therefore, we're not going to allow the IRS to enforce its own rules.
Yeah, and I understand nothing like this can happen, but the idea that government would be manipulated to the point where their clear goal is to aid people in continued evasion of the law feels accomplice-y. It's not in a legal sense, but it certainly seems as if you're giving an assist to someone that you know is breaking the law, and you'd prefer that they continue to do so. But somehow they've found that loophole, it is legal. By the way, I do want to point out that some of the arguments against increased funding for the IRS ties back to a story we talked about last week. Senator John Cornyn recently said, I don't think anybody's looking forward to an army of auditors to audit your tax returns. Unfortunately, the IRS is a reputation problem because of weaponization, the lowest learners of the world. Well, we talked, I think last week, about the fact that all these right-wing groups, the Koch brothers and others, these representing billionaires, they had started lobbying against the IRS provision in the infrastructure deal, sending a letter to senators that read in part, no additional funding for the IRS, especially given its multiple scandals over the past decade. We have not forgotten about lowest learners' tactics of using IRS enforcement to harass conservative groups and donors. Republicans in Congress shouldn't either. It's all nonsense. That's not actually what happened back then, but it's pretty clear how the billionaire front group, their letter has directly influenced these senators, and the senators are now just spreading it and saying that's why we're not going to do it. So that is a very effective form of lobbying, apparently.
Yeah, and there's also, look, if the Republicans are really concerned about the lowest learners who may be out there, and granted, there may be some unscrupulous IRS employees who are gonna look up tax returns and target people they don't like. But you know what? There are rules already in place to deal with those IRS employees. So here's an idea. You give the IRS more money for enforcement. And oh, by the way, part of the more money they have is so that there can be more internal watchdogs within the organization who can make sure that IRS employees are not abusing their authority. That's the grown-up common sense way of dealing this. But to just throw up your hands and say, oh no, we don't want Amazon, we don't want Exxon, we don't want all these people who have great accountants and take advantage of the loopholes. We don't want them to have to pay anymore. We don't want to have to go through an audit. Well, you know what? If some of these large corporations would go through an audit, I think it would actually make a lot of us feel a lot better, because I know a lot of ordinary citizens who go through an audit if our numbers are not perfectly correct. So why shouldn't these billionaires and large corporations do the same, particularly when we're talking about huge amounts of money in their case?
Exactly. Yeah, and potentially it could be bringing in a lot of money. Let's go back to Rokan's tweet. He says, because of budget cuts, the IRS audits only half of large companies' tax returns. That means there's up to $235 billion in corporate tax benefits slipping under the radar. The solution is clear: fund the IRS and audit massive corporations. I think that makes all the sense in the world. My fear, I'm not surprised to see that the Republicans are turning against literally anything in the bipartisan bill. But it's easy for him to be like, I don't even worry about it. It's gonna be in the reconciliation bill, but will it? I honestly, I don't know what Manchin's position is on increased funding for the IRS, or Kirsten Sinema, or regardless of what their position might be up until now. Once those lobbyists have succeeded in the bipartisan bill, do we think that they're not gonna be turning to try to get one Democrat to side with them to take it out of the reconciliation bill as well? That seems pretty obvious to me, whether it'll succeed or not. I certainly think that it's gonna happen.
I'm with you. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And look, you can argue against anything by saying, well, we can say we need to pass all sorts of climate change legislation because of what the Republicans might do if they gain control. Well, you know what? That's not how legislation works. Anybody might do anything in the future. The question is, what do you believe in right now? Do you believe, yes or no, that the IRS should do a better job of collecting the taxes that are owed to the American people to the Treasury Department? Yes or no?
Exactly. That's an easy question.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.